don't need anyone. Machiavelli lesson. They only chase what they can't catch. They only want what doesn't need them. It's a truth so ancient it feels carved into the stone of our very existence, a cold, hard fact that we spend our lives trying to outrun. But you can't. Not really. I've watched it happen time and again, in 1,000 different rooms and 1,000,000 different relationships. The moment you step off the stage of their approval, the applause dies. They gather at the curtains, frantic, desperate for an encore you'll never perform again. It's a drama as old as human interaction, and for too long, I was the main character, a tragic figure, forever dancing for a crowd that would never be satisfied. You see, people are trained to circle weakness. It's an instinct as old as the desert itself, a predatory urge to find the softest spot, the hesitation in your voice, the insecurity flickering in your eyes, the desperate need for a nod, a smile, a pat on the back. They smell it on you like blood in the water. It's a scent that draws them in, a silent invitation to feed on your validation. They don't want to hurt you, not maliciously, but they will, simply because they can. And you, in your brokenness, you let them. You handed them the knife and thanked them for the crumbs. For years I believed that my value was tied to the number of people who liked me. The more friends I had, the more invitations I received, the more I felt like a person of worth. I was a man built on borrowed smiles and whispered promises. My whole identity was a house of cards, constantly on the verge of collapse with every shift in the wind of public opinion. I spent every waking moment performing, playing a role that kept me soft enough to squeeze, compliant enough to mold. I was easy to digest, a bite-sized piece of a person, easy to spit out when it was no longer convenient. The world called it being a good person. They called it being a team player, agreeable, a loyal friend. But there is nothing colder than a smile forced through gritted teeth. There is nothing more suffocating than needing hands that only ever wanted to hold you down. You're taught that being needed is being loved, that your worth comes from serving others, from filling their empty cups, from being a walking, breathing solution to their loneliness. And so, you pour yourself out, over and over, until you are nothing but an echo of the person you once were. You become the ocean they can drain, but never fill. It's a grand illusion, a performance that drains you slowly, like a leak in the soul. But I saw it for what it was. I had to. It was becoming too much. The constant compromise, the endless explanations, the ceaseless dance for belonging. I was losing my own rhythm, forgetting the song I was born to sing. The anxiety was a persistent hum in my ears, a low, constant fear that I was about to say the wrong thing, wear the wrong clothes, be the wrong person. It was a prison of my own making, with bars forged from other people's expectations. I was trapped. Every decision I made was filtered through the lens of, how will this make them feel about me? I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the hallways of other people's approval. But a ghost can't feel the warmth of the sun, can't taste the salt of the sea. I was living on scraps, and my soul was starving. There were nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for a single crack, a single moment where I had disappointed someone. It was a madness, a deep psychological hunger for validation that could never be satisfied. Then, one night, in the darkest hour, I found my way out. Not a physical door, but a mental one. A realization so profound, it felt like a thunderclap in the stillness. I saw the truth. I grasped the rules of the game. I recognized that my vulnerabilities were their advantage, my desires their leverage. With a chilling and undeniable certainty, I realized that to become whole again, I needed to take bold action. I had to seal the wound. I had to cut away the part of me that yearned for approval. I had to stop performing. I had to leave the spotlight. And I had to do it on my own. The very idea filled me with a primal dread, a fear of the empty silence. But it was also the first real breath I'd taken in years. It was the moment the old me died, and the new me began to take his first, shaky steps. I remember the first time I felt it. Not the relief, not yet, but the sheer, mind-numbing panic. The silence. The sudden, deafening quiet after a lifetime of clamoring for attention. It was a Tuesday. I had a coffee with an old friend, one of those relationships built on a shaky foundation of shared history and my constant need to please. He was telling me about his new project, a passion he was pouring himself into. The old me, the one I had just tried to kill, would have immediately launched into a series of questions, a flurry of affirmations, a desperate attempt to prove I was engaged, interested, and needed as a confidant. I would have been performing. But that day, something was different. I just listened. And when he was done, I didn't offer a solution or an empty compliment. I simply said, "That's great," and took a sip of my coffee. A tense beat of silence passed, a whole 2 seconds that felt like an eternity. I saw the look on his face. Not anger, not sadness, confusion. He was used to the old me, the one who gave so much, who was so easy to read. My quiet strength was a new variable, and it was deeply unsettling to him. It was a small act, almost insignificant to anyone else, but for me, it was a seismic shift. I had broken the script. I had refused the invitation to perform. And in that moment, I became the problem he couldn't solve. This wasn't about being mean. It wasn't about being cold. It was about defining my own boundaries for the first time in my life. The problem wasn't the people around me. Not entirely. The problem was me. I had taught them how to treat me. I had held the leash and begged them to lead. I had made myself a banquet of bite-sized pieces, easy to consume and just as easy to discard. I was the one who kept showing up at tables that served poison with the wine, making myself palatable, digestible, waiting to be spat out when convenient. My fear of being alone was so great that I would betray myself just to avoid an empty room. I lived in a state of constant anxiety, a low-grade fear that I was not enough. I was the man who felt like he was always on trial, forever seeking a verdict of liked. It's an exhausting way to live. Every conversation was a performance. Every relationship, a negotiation. I would mentally replay conversations, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for a single misstep that might have cost me an ounce of someone's approval. I was always apologizing, always explaining, always trying to soften my truths to spare feelings that would never spare mine. It was this deep-seated need to be liked that had become my biggest vulnerability. It was the crack in my armor, and the world had its fingers in it, ready to pry it open. They knew they could blackmail me with rejection. They knew they could bind me with their approval. They could cage me with their conditional love, because I loved their attention more than my own freedom. This wasn't just a personality flaw. It was a fundamental miscalculation of my own worth. I had been taught that my self-worth was an external object, a prize to be won from others, not an internal truth to be cultivated. This is the challenge we all face. It's a quiet, insidious poison that drips into our souls from childhood. The need for a gold star from a teacher, a nod from a parent, a smile from a crush. We are raised to believe that validation is the currency of love, that being needed is the same as being loved. We're never taught the dark truth Machiavelli knew so well. Better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. He wasn't talking about physical fear, but the kind that comes from respect. The fear that you are an untamed, unbreakable force. He knew that when you stop needing anyone, you become the only one they all need. And so, my story wasn't unique. It was the story of almost everyone I knew, a story of endless compromise and ceaseless dances for belonging. The challenge wasn't to change them, but to change myself, to stop being a subject and to become a ruler, to stop playing the victim and to become the author of my own life, to trade the suffocating cage of needing others for the terrifying, exhilarating wilderness of being alone. I knew it would be a lonely path, a treacherous one, but I also knew it was the only path that led to freedom. The first step was the hardest, stepping off the stage and into the silence. But it was the only move that mattered. It was the beginning of my own quiet revolution. The slow burn of betrayal isn't a single dramatic moment. It's 1,000 tiny cuts. It's the late-night call you answer, only to realize they didn't want to talk to you. They just wanted to vent. It's the small favor they ask, which isn't small at all. It's the moment you realize your friends don't see your kindness as a virtue, but as a weakness to be exploited. It's the quiet, horrifying understanding that the more you give, the more they will demand, until you have nothing left to offer. I lived through this, over and over, until my soul felt like a brittle, hollowed-out thing. I remember a specific instance. A friend I had known for years. Let's call him Alex. Alex was a master of the slow bleed. He'd call, frantic, with some new crisis, a job he hated, a relationship that was falling apart, a family issue that was overwhelming. And I, the old me, would jump. I would drop everything, cancel my own plans, and listen for hours. I'd offer advice, comfort, and validation. I'd make him feel seen, heard, and important. And he would always end the conversation with a quick, "Thanks, man, you're the best," and vanish. No reciprocal check-in, no question about how I was doing. My role was simple: to be an emotional dumping ground, a human-sized container for his anxieties. My kindness was a utility, not a cherished trait. He wasn't drawn to me out of love for who I was, but hunger for what he could drain from me. Then one day, I called him. I had just gone through a difficult breakup, and I felt utterly alone. I needed a friend. I needed someone to listen. I needed a fraction of the emotional energy I had given so freely. I called, and the phone rang, and then went to voicemail. I left a message, a raw, honest plea. "Hey man, it's me. I'm going through it right now. Could you call me back when you get a chance?" I waited. An hour, then 2. A full day passed, and then another. Silence. Not a busy signal, not a text, just silence. It was the loudest, most deafening sound I had ever heard. In that quiet space, I realized the horrifying truth. My friendship had been a one-way street. I had been serving a feast, while they had only ever brought an empty cup. It was a painful, gut-wrenching lesson, and in that moment, the hurt gave way to something else. Anger. Not at Alex, but at myself. I had allowed it. I had taught them that my kindness was without limits, that my soul was theirs to drain. I had been a willing victim in a game I didn't even know I was playing. This is the central dilemma of the people-pleaser. You believe you are building bridges, but you are actually building cages. You think you are fostering connection, but you are only creating dependency. You fear being alone so much that you let yourself be owned, a puppet on a string, dancing for approval. It's a self-inflicted wound, a betrayal of your own soul. The more you give of yourself, the less they respect you. They see your eagerness as a sign of weakness, and they punish you for it. They test your boundaries, hoping to find a crack. A small compromise here, a swallowed truth there, a half-hearted apology for a crime you didn't commit. And you give them everything, because you're terrified of the silence that comes with a refusal. But the silence is where the magic happens. It's where you stop performing and start listening to yourself. I stood in the wreckage of that friendship, not with tears, but with a sudden, icy clarity. I didn't try to win Alex back. I didn't rush to mend the bridge he had burned. I let the ashes scatter in the wind because I realized that some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to stay in ruin as monuments to your evolution. I understood now that Machiavelli's counsel wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity. It was about recognizing that if you cannot be respected, you will be owned. And I, for a lifetime, had been owned. But that was about to change. The anger in my gut wasn't bitterness. It was the fire I needed to forge a new path. A path through the wilderness, alone if necessary. The solitude of self-discovery wasn't a sudden blissful escape. It was a slow, terrifying descent. I remember the first weeks after I started consciously pulling back. My phone, once a buzzing monument to my social life, grew silent. The text messages and social media notifications, once a constant stream of validation, dwindled to a trickle. The emptiness of a Friday night became a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I'd sit on my couch, the TV a muted glow in the corner, and the fear would creep in. The fear that they were right. The fear that I was distant, cold, indifferent. The fear that I was making a terrible, irreversible mistake. Loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about facing the ghost of who you were, the person who needed a room full of people to feel complete. I had to sit with that ghost. I had to let the silence become a fortress, not a prison. I began to discover things about myself I had long buried under layers of people-pleasing. I rediscovered my love for old books, for the way the pages smelled of dust and forgotten time. I found solace in long, silent walks through the park, not to be seen, but simply to be. I started building my own fortress, not out of bricks and mortar, but out of quiet moments and unspoken truths. This is the part of the story that most people will never understand. They can't fathom loving without possessing. They can't imagine loyalty without conditions. They don't know how to breathe in the rare air of self-sufficiency. They are so chained to their need for approval, for company, for belonging at any cost, that they sell their souls for a seat at tables that serve poison. And you'd rather starve alone than be fed lies among traitors. Your solitude is not emptiness. It's a garden you've cultivated where no one else's weeds can grow. It is a sanctuary for your true self, a place where you can sit in stillness that feeds itself. I began to realize that what I once sought in their eyes, approval, affection, meaning, was always mine to give, never theirs to own. I discovered that I could fill my own cup. My roots ran deep beneath the surface where their shallow eyes could not see. I learned to drink from the underground rivers of my own will, my own resolve. It was a terrifying process, like a rebirth. I was shedding my old skin, and it was painful and raw. I had to face my own demons, my own insecurities, and make them kneel. I had to sit in the darkness and not choke. I had to let the silence turn to steel in my veins. And as I did, I began to see the world differently. The game they played was simple. Keep you dependent, keep you predictable, praise you when you obey, punish you when you don't. But once you step outside that game, they have no moves left. Their tactics, guilt, gossip, withdrawal, lose all their bite. You've removed the hooks from your skin, the strings from your back. You move through the world with an unsettling calm, because they cannot fathom a person who will not be leashed by loneliness. They want your anger, because anger is still a bond, a reaction, a proof that they matter enough to move you, but you give them only indifference. They want your explanation, because explanations open doors they can crawl back through, but you offer only silence. They want your remorse, because remorse keeps you kneeling, but your back stays straight, your eyes level, your soul untethered. I was no longer just a player. I was the author of an entirely new paradigm. My silence was not absence. It was an emblem. It proclaimed to the world that my worth was measured by nothing but my own standard. I learned belatedly that it was never about what I could give them, but what I refused to lose to them. And in that refusal, I began to see the true face of my own sovereignty. I was building my own table, my own feast. And those same people who once laughed at my solitude would soon begin to tremble when they realized I had made loneliness my ally. I was becoming untouchable, not through cruelty, but through a radical, unwavering commitment to myself. The first test came like a ghost from my past. It was a phone call from Alex. My stomach tightened into a knot I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, my hand hovered over the ignore button. The old me would have answered in a nanosecond, feigning nonchalance while my heart hammered in my chest. He would have felt my desperate eagerness through the line, a needy vibration he could feed on. But the new me, forged in the fire of solitude, had no such urgency. I let it ring. He tried again, and again. I watched the screen, an unsettling calm washing over me. 3 missed calls, then a text. "Hey man, you okay? Haven't heard from you." That was the line, the classic hook. He wasn't worried. He was fishing for a response, a sign that the old him still had power over the old me. The message was a test, a small barbed wire fence to see if I would still jump when he told me to. I could feel the old patterns twitching in my muscles, the familiar urge to explain, to apologize, to smooth things over. "Sorry, man. Been swamped. Everything's good. Just busy." That was the script. A simple, predictable reply that would reassure him that his puppet was still on the string, just momentarily tangled. But I was no longer a puppet. I was a sovereign. I closed my eyes and let the silence sit there between us, a wall of quiet strength that he could not penetrate. The truth that terrified him most was that I didn't think about him at all. His praise was noise, his scorn was wind. Both passed through me without leaving a mark. I didn't hate him. I was simply indifferent. And that indifference, I was learning, was my most powerful weapon. It was the armor Machiavelli had written about, a shield forged from the realization that his opinion no longer had any currency in my life. He didn't know what to do with a man who wasn't begging for crumbs of attention. He expected anger, explanations, or a panicked return to the fold. But I gave him none of it. My lack of reaction was the reaction he couldn't handle. My absence was more powerful than his presence. His need for a response became a new currency, and I held all the cards. I had become the thing he wanted most, someone he couldn't have, someone who didn't care if he stayed or left. This internal struggle was the first real climax of my new life. It wasn't a fight with him. It was a battle within myself. It was the internal dialogue between the person I used to be and the person I was becoming. The old me screamed, "Answer him! What if he never calls again? What if he hates you?" The new me simply stood there, quiet, watching the ghosts of those fears swirl and then dissipate. I knew that losing him as a friend was not a loss at all. It was a release, a freeing of emotional space that could now be filled with something else, something real and unconditional. The old me would have caved. I would have run back, tail between my legs, apologizing for being distant. But what they called unreachable, I now knew as freedom. What they called cold, I now knew as my shield against the frost of their betrayal. I was not stone. I was iron forged in the fire of my solitude. My kindness was not gone. It was now a blade I wielded with purpose, no longer scattered like confetti at anyone's feet, but gifted with intention, where it could not be twisted into a chain around my throat. I chose who received my warmth. That choice was my sovereignty. That choice was the throne they could not topple. I let his texts sit unanswered, and every time I resisted the urge to reply, I felt a new piece of my soul click into place. I was rebuilding myself, not with their approval as my foundation, but with my own quiet resolve. This wasn't about winning an argument or proving a point. This was about proving something to myself, that I could stand alone, that my solitude was a sanctuary, and that I was done performing for a crowd that only ever wanted to see me fall. The decision to break the shackles wasn't a single dramatic declaration. It was a series of quiet final actions. It began with the silence I gave to Alex, but it extended to every corner of my life. I stopped answering texts from people who only reached out when they needed something. I politely declined invitations to gatherings where I knew I'd be a performance piece. I stopped over-explaining my choices to my family, who still saw me as the agreeable boy they could always count on. The questions came, of course. Why are you so distant? What's wrong? You've changed. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. The old me would have caved under the pressure. I would have launched into a long-winded explanation about needing space, about finding myself, about burnout. I would have made their confusion and concern my problem to solve. I would have laced my tongue with sugar to soften a truth they weren't ready to hear. But the new me knew better. I offered no explanations, only a quiet, unnerving calm. My refusal to engage with their drama was the ultimate act of rebellion. I was learning that my silence was a weapon. It was an unassailable wall. The less they heard of my thoughts, the less they could twist them. The less they knew about my needs, the less they could poison them. Machiavelli understood this. He knew the prince must not show all his cards. Mystery is power. Secrecy is survival. I began to walk through rooms like a shadow, unbothered, unclaimed, and untouchable. And in my quiet steps, they heard the roar of someone who could not be cornered. The fear in their eyes was a new experience. It was not the fear of a monster, but the fear of the unknown. They remembered the old me, the one who flinched when they frowned, who apologized for existing, who begged for crumbs of affection. That ghost haunted them now because it was gone forever. They would poke at me, hoping to resurrect that version, to find a crack, a weakness, an old wound they could press their fingers into. But the scars I wore now were armored. They no longer bled. They no longer stung. They were a daily reminder that I had survived what they thought would break me. The final decision was not to leave them, but to have already left them in my mind. It was the realization that I could not be threatened with rejection, because I had already embraced solitude. I had made loneliness my ally. They couldn't threaten to withdraw their love, because I no longer saw it as a treasure to be earned. Love offered as ransom is not love. I wanted none of it. I had learned the hard lesson that most people are not drawn to you out of love for what you are, but hunger for what they can drain from you. And the moment I made peace with my solitude, I became something they could no longer feed upon. Their need turned to desperation. They would call me arrogant, selfish, cold. But their words were chains made of paper. They burned the moment I lit the fire of my own indifference. I was no longer trying to be good in their eyes. I was simply becoming true in my own. I wasn't playing hard to get. I was an ocean, deep and unfathomable, and the tide no longer answered to their whims. I could pull back when I chose, crash when I chose, and remain calm when I chose. That freedom, that raw, unchained sovereignty, was the decision that changed everything. I was no longer a player in their game. I was the author of my own, and it was a game I was finally winning. The twist. The moment they realized their tactics were no longer working. It wasn't a single event, but a series of panicked, desperate attempts to regain control. They had expected me to crumble under the weight of my self-imposed solitude. They had expected me to come crawling back, broken by loneliness, begging for a seat at their table. But I was still standing. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. My quiet calm was an unanswerable riddle, and it drove them to distraction. The first sign of the shift was the gossip. I'd hear whispers from mutual acquaintances, the frantic, confused tales they spun to explain my distance. He's changed. He's lost his heart. He's become cold stone. They couldn't comprehend that my withdrawal was a choice, a form of self-preservation, so they had to invent a narrative where I was the villain, the betrayer, the man who had lost his way. They called me ruthless when I stopped explaining. They called me arrogant when I stopped apologizing for who I had become. But the truth, the one that terrified them most, was far simpler. I had become whole. I had retrieved every piece of myself I once scattered in their hands, each apology that cost me my spine, each forced smile that dulled my teeth. I stood before my own reflection and saw no cracks, no borrowed shapes, only the outline of a sovereign soul who had nothing left to beg for. Then came the second twist, the approach. They came to me now, not with demands, but with sweet words, with carefully crafted pleas. "You've changed," they'd say. "Yes," I'd reply, with an unsettling ease. "You've become so distant." "Yes," I'd agree, without a hint of remorse. "We miss the old you." They wanted me to miss him too. They hoped I still mourned the ghost of the people-pleaser. But that ghost was gone, buried under miles of midnight conversations with my own demons. I wore its ashes now, not in mourning, but like war paint. Their final, desperate move was the most telling. They began to idolize me. The same people who had once mocked my solitude now envied my peace. They dressed their envy in gossip, their longing in rumors. But I could feel it. The subtle shift from scorn to a strange, almost terrified respect. They were drawn to the heat they could no longer possess, the fire they could not extinguish. I had become the storm they prayed would pass, yet longed to feel. I had become a ghost in their minds, impossible to touch, unforgettable to forget. This was the Machiavellian secret I had stumbled upon. When you stop needing anyone, you become the only one they all need. They wanted a piece of the peace I had found, the unshakable calm, the power of a person who will not be leashed by loneliness. My solitude had exposed their cowardice. My existence mocked their chains. They wanted to stand close enough to my fire to feel the warmth, but not so close they were consumed by it. And they never would be, because they never understood that the fire was not meant for them. It was meant for me. The greatest twist was internal. It wasn't about them at all. It was about me. I had come to understand that my strength wasn't in domination, but in withdrawal. Power wasn't about what I could take, but about what I refused to lose. I had found my throne in detachment. My silence, once a sign of fear, had become a roar that shook their tiny, trembling kingdoms to the ground. I had become an unsolvable puzzle. They could examine my silences like ancient runes, looking for clues to bring me back to the cage. But I had thrown away the key. There was no going back to the table I once begged to sit at. I had built my own, and in that simple, sovereign act, I had won. And so you stand there, the untamed, the unbroken, the unchained, the one they gossip about when the lights go out, the one they want to tame, to save, to possess, but never will. You are the proof that freedom is possible and that truth alone makes you dangerous, because your existence mocks their chains. Your solitude exposes their cowardice. Your silence becomes the roar that shakes their tiny, trembling kingdoms to the ground. You are the reminder that nobody owns you. Nobody defines you. Nobody commands your loyalty, but you. In your withdrawal is your power. In your detachment is your crown. In your refusal to need them, you become the only thing they want. Everybody wants you when you don't need anyone. And that is the empire they can never conquer. They linger at the edges of your silence, hoping your walls will crumble under the weight of their absence. But they never understood. Your walls are not a prison. They're a sanctuary. While they wait for you to come crawling back, you sit in a stillness that feeds itself. They wonder how you survive without their praise, their conversation, their validation. But your roots run deep beneath the surface, where their shallow eyes cannot see. You learned to drink from the underground rivers of your own will, your own resolve. You see it clearly now. The game they play is simple. Keep you dependent, keep you predictable, praise you when you obey, punish you when you don't. But once you step outside that game, they have no moves left. Their tactics, guilt, gossip, withdrawal, lose all bite. You've removed the hooks from your skin, the strings from your back. You move through the world with an unsettling calm, because they cannot fathom a person who will not be leashed by loneliness. People love to play savior until you save yourself. Then they hate you for it. They needed your brokenness more than you ever needed their help. Now they cannot stand the sight of you standing tall, proof that they were never your rescue, but your cage. And so they'll whisper that you've grown cold, bitter, unreachable. But what they call unreachable, you know as freedom. What they call bitter, you know as clarity. What they call cold, you know as your shield against the frost of their betrayal. You are not stone. You are iron forged in the fire of your solitude. Your kindness is not gone. It is now a blade you wield with purpose. You no longer waste your breath softening truths to spare feelings that would never spare yours. You no longer lace your tongue with sugar when poison is what they offer you in return. Your presence is not a given. Your attention is not owed. Your forgiveness is not a ritual. It is a choice, and rarely given twice. This is the final lesson. Machiavelli would nod in approval, not because you are cruel, but because you understand the anatomy of power. Its root is always detachment. He would see in you the living proof that respect is not granted to those who kneel, but to those who stand, even when standing means standing alone. You have learned that vulnerability is not owed. It is a gift, and only those who prove they won't weaponize it get to hold it. So you move differently now. You do not announce your plans. You do not explain your decisions. You do not advertise your dreams to ears that hope to sabotage them. You stand there, a sovereign, the architect of your own silence. And in that silence, you have found the sweetest victory of all. You don't need them, and so they can never hold you hostage again. You are not their puppet anymore. You are the author of an entire paradigm. You've burned too many bridges to ever cross them again, and in those ashes, you found the soil in which your freedom grows. So let them watch you build alone, rule alone, walk alone when needed. They will wish for your return, while you roam through your own wilderness, free as the wind through uncharted lands. And they will want you more now than they ever did when you needed them. If this story resonated with you, if you feel that familiar ache for freedom, consider this a sign. The first step is the hardest, but the journey to self-sovereignty is the most rewarding you will ever take. For more insights into applying Stoic and other timeless philosophies to modern life, be sure to subscribe to the Stoic Philosophy channel and join our community. Your journey awaits.
Thank you for watching this video here on the Stoic philosophy. If you found value in this, I invite you to explore more videos on the channel. There's so much more wisdom to uncover. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.